to the best of my knowledge, and I'm 99% sure this is true, that I'm the youngest founding member of SON.
Okay.
Okay. And me being 86, and there haven't been any other founding members at the last two SON meetings, I'm not too sure that you're going to be interviewing very many other founding members. That's just my perception. Okay. You know, at the moment. And so I'd like to set the stage sort of a little bit before SON uh, to give you sort of the environment in which SON was founded in relation to that. And so if you go back to about 1900, there were not very many nematologists in the United States. There were quite a few in Europe at that time. And really, the only two books that were readily available at that time were Cobb's contributions to a science of nematology, and also Chitwood's book, which had all the electrical diagrams in it at that time. While nematologists like Thorne were working at that time, their books hadn't been published, okay, yet. So if we then move fast forward, okay, to about 1960, um, there was a book published that time by Sasser and Jenkins about the fundamentals of nematology. And also at that time, there was a little red book. If you don't have a copy, there's one for, I think, $9.75 online, okay, at the moment, but by Christie. And those were the two first books of nematology that I was introduced to. But 1960, when the fundamentals of nematology was published, it was kind of interesting because a couple years before that, the National Science Foundation had hosted a nematology class at North Carolina State University. And maybe 10 or 12 or so nematology graduate students were there. And so that sort of began the foundation of graduate students in nematology, except those that were trained at USDA ARS in Beltsville, Maryland. So basically, that's sort of my version of nematology history prior to the time that I got involved myself. And I remember very distinctly my senior year of college. I was at Rutgers University for my bachelor's degree, and I had decided that I was going to go on for a master's. And I only applied at Rutgers, but I applied to three departments, entomology, plant pathology, and it wasn't a department, but there was a new nematologist there, W.R. Jenkins, from the book. And I applied to all three, and all three of them accepted me. And I don't really know why at that time, I now know, but I chose nematology. And it was December of the year before I graduated that one of Dr. Jenkins' graduate students found me writing a research paper in the basement of the Ag Library and came and said, Dr. Jenkins would like you to join this organization that doesn't exist yet, but will next summer, the Society of Nematologists. Will you write a very small check? And so 6 months before SON, okay, uh, became into existence, I paid my first year's dues. Okay, so that's sort of my beginnings in SON. If I look at my sheet here at the the key goals of SON at that to begin with. Okay, uh, basically there weren't very many nematologists, and plant nematology was sort of embedded in APS, American Phytopathological, okay, Society. So basically, were several debates going on. There were a group of nematologists that provided the original leadership, like Merlin, Merlin Allen in California, and Rasky in California, and Jenkins up in Washington, and Bill May at Cornell University, and Joe Sasser at North Carolina State University, and my major professor, W.R. Jenkins at Rutgers University. And in my opinion, those were sort of the key leaders that put together the Society of Nematologists at that time. There were probably a few others that I've forgotten at the moment. Oh, there were some others at Beltsville, okay, that were definitely involved. And the role at that time was because of the soil fumigation business that came out of Shell and Dow Chemical as a result, basically, of World War II. Okay, when we got into the chemotechnology afterwards, those chemicals, the soil fumigates, began to show that there was a very definite nematode problem many places we hadn't seen it before. So if you take those leaders plus what was happening in mainstream agriculture at that time, there appeared to be a need for strengthening the science of nematology. Now, there were debates that went on at that time. One of the debates was that they thought it would be disadvantaged to leave the APS, American Phytopathological Society. And another debate was what should we call this organization? As you know, it's Society of Nematologists. That's basically for people that are professional nematologists, and an alternative would have been, the Society of Nematology. So that's what was happening at that particular time. Um, I did not attend the first meeting of the Society of Nematologists, but I believe I attended the second one and the third one. And I was pretty young nematologist at that time. But before I get to that, excuse me just a minute. I don't have a cold or anything, but just had a little runny nose. Okay. Um, so I started my graduate program in 1961. And in 1962, the second NSF training program for graduate students was held at Cornell University under the direction of Dr. Bill May. I don't know if you've ever heard about this particular course, but it was a major contribution to the next decade or two of nematology in the United States. What happened was the 30 best nematologists from the world, Oostenbrink, Seinhorst, Thorne, all those people were invited as lecturers. They came in, a group of them, every week. It was a 3-week course. I attended it before the end of my first year of graduate school. So it was extremely valuable to me. And there were 30 young nematologists there. So at that 3-week period, 30 future nematologists studied with the 30 best nematologists of the world. And of course, we all had just joined the Society of Nematology. So there was a tremendous comradeship that developed before that. In other words, not only did we go to class and to Bill May's house for a banquet once per week, but we probably had a beer every now and then, okay? And I can remember as a young graduate student sitting on the curb talking about nematodes to Van Gundy and Ivan Thomason eating an ice cream cone. Okay. And so it all brought all of this together very, very early. I think I can't hear you at the moment, but
That sounds exciting to be part of like an emerging science and one
yes.
of, a small group of people pursuing a
Well,
field that had kind of been not
30,
explored.
there were 60 nematologists that participated in that meeting over time, 30
Yeah.
professional ones and 30 students.
So were
I
you aware of any challenges in Sun kind of becoming established and if so, how are those challenges overcome?
the initial challenges, I don't think, were very great after the real decision okay, was made. At that time, money was short, okay, as it is today. So people had challenges of going to the Society of Nematology meetings. I believe it was the third meeting that was at Colorado State, and I went on my own with my own money, even though I don't think I had any, and none of Bill May's other graduate students, and we had a fairly large lab at Cornell. Okay, at that time went. So getting to the annual meetings was very challenging at that time. Last year, 2025, I had 7 flights to 7 different meetings that I attended. Uh, in my early days as a nematologist, okay, I would get on an airplane once a year, and that would be to go to the SON meeting.
Hmm.
So transportation, okay, was a challenge. But I think once the decision was made, everybody was really anxious to make it work.
Hmm.
And as you see, there was a mixture of the young and the old. And at the early days, okay, as you sort of said in your notes here, I think our main focus was on nematode taxonomy and nematode control, which I don't use anymore. I always use the word management. Uh, so it was basically nematode management and taxonomy in the early days.
Okay. Yeah, and then so that's 1960s. You're saying early 1960s, there was
Oh,
a
well,
very small group of
yeah,
nematologists. Then by 1980, early 1980s, there's almost 1,000 people in SON. So t tell me a little bit about that time. How did Sun evolve during this time to become?
well, I told you that joined in 1960, 1960.
Hmm.
Okay. Um, I became secretary fairly rapidly. Okay. And then vice president, and I was president of SON when I was only 39, which I think is, fairly young, okay, for these days. And most of our activities at that time revolved around a newsletter and the annual meeting, and a fairly small, society compared with many of the other ones. Um, One thing that was very unique, I think, at the annual meetings back in those days, we're up now to 1979, in 1979, the year I was president of SON, the meeting was actually held at my home institution, Michigan State University. And being president and holding the meeting there, guess what? I also put on a statewide tour. But something for, and we've had about, I'm just guessing with this number, but we had 30 people on a bus. And what's very different today that I think was very valuable then, it was an overnight tour back in those days. So it was a 2 day tour with one overnight. And I think that was extremely valuable, like that first SON course, because you can get to know people very well when you're eating with them overnight and traveling that. I mentioned Ivan Thomason's name earlier. I remember on that first bus tour, the bus driver got some gasoline on him, and Ivan went out and helped him pump gas. Okay, during that tour. So that was number one. The next thing that happened, and you probably know the date, and I don't remember the date off the top of my head, was we did not have a journal, okay, at that time. And so the next major contribution for Society of Nematologists was the development of the Journal of Nematology. And my major professor, W.F. Bill May, basically was who I believe the first editor, and with other nematologists had a lot to do with putting that journal together. And so that was really, in my opinion, the pride and joy and big next step because there was Nematologica, okay, in Europe, and then a lot of people still published in phytopathology and plant disease or plant disease. Uh, I guess today our editors are having trouble getting reviewers and they get turned down a lot. And I think I've done three for plant disease in the past week because being semi-retired, okay, I have a little more time, okay, than I used to. Actually, uh, I retired from my tenure stream faculty position 22 years ago, but I still basically work full time as a nematologist, on what the university calls a fixed term appointment. So they don't have to pay benefits or anything like that. So where do we are on your list of questions?
I think I wanna, so maybe around there at 4 or 5, so kind of understanding better how um, the Society of Nematologists responded to changes in the 80s and 90s in terms of
Yeah.
advances in science and molecular genetic sciences, also changes in regulations about the chemical fumigants.
First,
Mhm.
the fumigants a lot. I was brought up, basically on the soil fumigants. And one of the problems, and you're not this way in Hawaii, because Kurt, I think does a very good job uh, educating you guys on nematode control measures. But a lot of graduate students today, I see, have a fairly negative opinion of soil fumigants. And they say that having never smelled one or ever applied one. Okay. And while soil fumigants have some detrimental soil health things, I think we're finding today that they also still have a place. There's beginning to become a literature that some of the fungi um, recolonize the rhizosphere very, very rapidly and may even activate, okay, some plant defense mechanisms. So there are a few papers about that coming out now. But one thing that came about in that era was the non-fumigant nematicides. And because some of us were brought up with the fumigants, we didn't think they would ever work. And basically today we're finding that they work, but maybe not quite as well as many of the fumigants. And of course, we're into integrated pest management. And that takes me back, a step back. That's kind of unique for me. In about 1979, the year after I was president, I made a decision to put all my emphasis uh, in nematology into making sure nematology was represented in the emerging concept of integrated pest management. You won't find integrated pest management in the literature before 1978. And the reason for that was, and I know, Ben, this is not quite SON, but I think it's very important. There were four universities. Okay, University of California, Berkeley for biological control, University of California, Cornell University for biological control. Of course, those were insects. Okay, we're talking about uh, Texas A&M for politics and money, and Michigan State University. You'll never guess where our leadership came from for development of IPM. These four universities basically invented IPM as a response to Rachel Carson's book, Silent Spring. Okay,
Mhm.
I could guess where the leadership would have come from in at Michigan State University. Bet you couldn't guess.
No, no.
Department of Electrical Engineering and System Science, the modeling.
Okay.
Okay, and the modeling and sort of the precursors of AI. Okay, were started. Okay, back about that time. So I made a sort of a contract with myself that my support after my presidency would be to make sure nematology is represented nationally in the integrated pest management movement. don't know that I was successful at that, but that's what I wanted to do. And then what happened for after that in the 1985 Farm Bill, and a bunch of us helped Congress write that. There was something called LISA. Have you ever heard LISA, Low Input Sustainable Agriculture?
Mm-mm.
Well, that was the beginning of the sustainability concept, 85 Farm Bill. That was 2 years before the United Nations discovered the word sustainability. Their first mention of it was in 1987. Okay. And then LISA, Low Input Sustainable Agriculture, you're familiar, I'm certain, about what LISA evolved into. LISA was in the 1985 Farm Bill. LISA became SARA in the 1990 Farm Bill. SARE, Sustainable Agriculture Research and Education.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. You've seen that logo many times, I'm
Yes,
sure.
yeah. Mm-hmm.
Maybe even been funded by
I
someone.
have I have funding from Sarah, correct.
That makes me happy
Uh-huh.
because I continued making sure that SON, okay, and nematology was involved. And for some reason, I got invited to take a sabbatical leave and go to Washington, D.C. And I was the first national director of SARA program. So I spent 2 years trying to figure out and implement what the SARA legislation means. So Monday of this week, okay, I went to a seminar at MSU about beetles on coffee in Mexico. And there was the Sarah program logo. And it just makes me very happy, as you can imagine, to see that.
Yeah, for sure. That's there's been a really
Um,
the program. It's a very large program now.
so, yeah, and you guys at Hawaii do a great job with it, one of the best, in my opinion.
We do get yeah. We Sarah supports us for sure. Sends us a lot of support. Is so in this period of the 80s and 90s, anyone come to mind from SON as a leader
Well,
who
of course, I'm a little bit older than Howard Ferris.
hmm
Okay. But Howard Ferris received a great honor last year at the SON meetings, and that name basically comes to mind. But dermatology, I think it wasn't until the 90s or about, yeah, I'm going to say the 90s is when we began to get into the molecular aspects of dermatology. And I would, in my own personal opinion, this might have been my greatest disappointment in SON and nematology. And while the society worked very hard to involve the C. elegans people in SON, we never really succeeded in making them realize that they are nematologists and to be part of SON. And they just basically continued in their own zoological way in the molecular movement. So the big change was the emphasis on molecular. And the other change that occurred simultaneously, I had never thought of this way before, with the sustainability is the ecology part.
hmm
Okay. And another thing that I missed that I have here in my notes that probably occurred around 1980-ish was the Best Student Paper Award. Okay. And that did not exist at the beginning, but I believe that came about around 1980. I do know that the first Best Student Paper Award was given to Mike McHenry, University of California, Riverside, even though he was at the Parlier Station.
hmm
And
What was the goal of having a student award like that?
I just think recognition of excellence among student papers. In other words, while you and I haven't talked about it, I think SON always had a mission of increasing the professionalism of the students of students of dermatology, and I think that was very important. And I think that still exists today. Um, I'm going to fast forward real quick right now to the 2024 annual meeting out in Utah. Uh, I think I saw the best comradeship among students at that meeting that I had ever seen at an SON meeting. And my personal opinion, the reason for that is another real fast forward change. And that has to do with the corporate side of nematology. And the business part, okay, of the chemical companies and things um, just sort of fit in SON as a committee, okay, but I don't think really emerged until relatively recently to the status that I saw last year when they provided a dinner for you and all kinds of interesting things. In other words, I saw a lot of activity there. And I also, I think we're missing some things in the middle here in our discussion, but I did fast forward. Uh, I think last year I saw a lot more interest among the graduate students in the private business opportunities that were potentially available. There have always been opportunities, but I think most of the graduate students have preferred academia or government. Now, we haven't discussed it very much, but USDA ARS has had in the early days a major influence on the development of SON. And while we've had a whole new episode of cuts in government recently, the USDA ARS nematology cuts began occurring, what, 10 years ago or so? And so there are fewer USDA ARS nematologists today than there were in the past. Why don't you ask me a couple questions? I can talk forever if I have to. Not,
Um,
not as long as that senator did. Uh,
yeah, I just want to circle back to you brought up a few of the changes there in the 80s and 90s. One of the changes you mentioned was the ecology and
right.
introduction of that, and if you could speak to a little bit of how that what that contributed to the society, and you also mentioned Howard Fair, so and those two things may be connected.
Yes. Okay.
Yeah.
Howard Ferris, I would call him an ecologist, and
Hmm.
he's also an applied ecologist. And but the science of ecology, I would argue, is a post-World War II science. It was basically just about ready to emerge before that. You can argue that in Europe there was a science of ecology that went back way before that, but I would argue that Eugene Odom's book from the University of Georgia, and that brings on a whole bunch of other names, okay, and it was the first major textbook in ecology, and that came out like 1959, something of that type. And so while we went from the fumigants to ecology to molecular uh, biology, I think there's an area that I missed there. And I guess that's the area that I guess we're supposed to call it spit, and I will call it nematode physiology, and basically the enzymes associated with the digestive system that impact the host. And of course, that brings up the name that I would have been very, very remiss to forget, and that's Richard Hussey at the University of Georgia. A big, well, it's something else, and all these people were staunch members of SON. So it's very hard for George Bird to differentiate between SON and nematology in the United States. It very definitely merges to me. But if we go back a little bit, See, Dick got his PhD at North Carolina State University, and North Carolina State um, University produced many graduate students, okay, under Joe Sasser and uh, I'm thinking one name, not Tarjan, but under Joe Sasser was the first one there, and there was a period in the right around 1980, okay, when Joe Sasser at North Carolina State University got a major conference put on for international students. It was the International Meloidogyne Conference. And another large cadre of nematology students and nematologists from around the world came to NC State for that. And two books were published about meloidogyne based on that particular conference. And while I haven't seen the statistics, I would wager that a good number of those people that came to that particular conference joined the Society of Nematologists. So SON at some point in time became kind of a more international, had more international members. And like when I was a graduate student, both at Cornell and at Rutgers, we had quite a few international graduate students, and they were all members of SON.
Hmm.
And so Hussey and his group had a major contribution to nematology and the Society of Nematologists. If we fast forward again to today, to the spit and the development of mechanisms of resistance, okay, Melissa Mitchum from the University of Georgia, who was a Dick Hussey student, is one of the leaders in that. And today I spend probably half of my time on the soybean cyst nematode coalition. And there we recommend, of course, resistance. And so if we went from the fumigants to the non-fumigant nematicides to, we will say, integrated pest management. And for most of nematology, resistant cultivars are not readily available, but they're more available today than they used to be. Like for Glabodera rostockiensis, we have resistant cultivars. It's much more difficult to get resistant cultivars for Glabodera pallida. But with soybean cyst nematode, we have resistant cultivars. And then again, if we fast forward, and SON has had papers on this, if you overuse that resistance, you get aggressive populations develop. So you have to basically rotate sources of resistance. So the ecology in SON sort of went hand in hand with the management. And I'm always in a quandary when I go to a meeting. It seems like some of those sessions are scheduled at the same time. Now let's fast back again. In the early days of nematology, probably up to maybe 1980-ish, there weren't any concurrent sessions. It was all just a nematology program. Okay. Oh, and then I don't know how George Bird in this particular session would have forgotten the SON meeting of 1987. I'm glad I got the door closed here and my wife isn't listening.
I
In
was gonna ask about a memorable, event. So this will maybe be it.
1987, I met my wife at the SON meeting.
Okay.
And at that time, she was Morgan Golden, and Morgan Golden was a taxonomist with USDA ARS. And my wife, Ann, was Morgan's electron microscopist. So, and she was attending the meeting. That's where we met.
All right. So, a organization of importance, personally and professionally. Okay, so we've talked a little, we've talked from the 60s to the present, and I'm interested from your perspective, what's kind of the line that runs through, what's a value tradition that has SON established early on that's endured through today.
We're all nematologists, and we're all in the minority because there are not that many nematologists. Okay. And it's, I think, one thing that I mentioned one thing earlier about SON in relation to C. elegans being something that I feel we still have work to do on. Um, Gerald Thorne, okay, he used to always say uh, that person doesn't know the difference between a hop toad and a nematode. And we still have a long ways to go in educating um, the general public in what nematodes are and the significance of nematodes, okay, in ecology. And also, while there has been some parts of SON that have dealt with animal and and human parasites, that part of our overall nematology discipline has still pretty much remained with the veterinarians and the medical profession. So if we really want in the future a complete nematology, I think we've got the molecular part and the breadth of nematodes in the ecosystem. Okay, for George Bird's opinion, you're getting more of a nematology lecture from George Bird than you're getting SON, but I can't separate the two in relation to this.
Well, it
So
sounds like SON has been, yeah, a part of your nematology career from the beginning.
I've
So,
taught this stuff for 60 years. Okay.
yeah.
It comes out. Okay. So you still see, and I still see it, saw it this week in a paper I reviewed, you still see the word free living nematode. Okay. Well, George Bird doesn't like that term. Okay. And I understand why it came about to begin with. But a free living nematode, I think, in its bottom line, would violate some of the principal laws of science because matter and energy has to come from someplace, go someplace. Okay, that may be kind of a broad statement, but I could make free living. Okay, uh, 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 that broad. So what we really need to put more emphasis on, and this has come about in recent years through ecology, is the bacteriivores, okay, and the fungivores relation. Uh, have was part of this overall evolution. If you go back through all of the nematology and meeting schedules, you'll see how this basically progressed. And the digestive system of nematodes is something that the microbiome, I mean, is something that's become very broad in science. And, the microbiome of nematodes, I think we still need to understand, okay, quite a bit better.
Hmm.
And then along this whole concept, and before this is not part of our interview, this next process, but before I go to bed tonight, I will be submitting a new ebook to a publisher, and the name of the ebook is Nematodes of North America, or Potato Nematodes of North America, Canada, the United States, and and Mexico. And one of the major problems we have in potato nematology is the virus vector part. And there's a new book coming out on nematode management that I have written, the virus vector chapter, or the control virus vector. So the virus vector thing we need to know a lot more about, and also viruses within nematodes that are not actually plant viruses that are vector.
Yeah, interesting. Yeah, well, I think that's a good example of the breadth of the society too, and kind of edges of where we're still,
And I think
new knowledge is needed.
it wasn't SON, but the very, very famous, he just about 3 years ago, entomologist by the name of E.O. Wilson, who was the world's greatest expert on the formicida, basically the ants.
Okay.
In his latter years, and I don't know if you have a copy of his illustration of It's a Nematode World, but I will send you, okay, a copy of that. And E.O. Wilson basically recognized the significance of nematodes, of nematodes and nematology. I don't think he was a member of SON,
Hmm.
but he was a truly great scientist.
All right. Yeah. Kind of moving on to how the SON brings people together. I think you mentioned that was a
Very,
theme
very.
from the beginning. So is there, and it's a pretty diverse, you mentioned we're all a minority being nematologists, but it is a group from academia, industry, government. You have students all the way to um, emeritus professors who attend the meeting. So how do you how does Sun cultivate community among this group of people?
Well, I think we do it these days, basically through websites didn't exist, computers didn't exist, okay, at that time. So now we not only have the journal, but we have the website and we have a newsletter. A new one came out. Communications is just uh, is probably the computer changed things as much as the automobile did, maybe even more. And the computer has allowed us to communicate all different types of ways, like you and I are doing. Okay, at the moment didn't exist basically 10 years ago. So just communication among nematologists and then among people that are not nematologists, I think is a major development. And SON has done a good job of that. Okay, I think at the moment. Uh, you can't imagine how I used to have to communicate with members of the Society of Nematologists when I was treasurer. Right? Each envelope had to be self-stamped through a machine that went like this with my hand. Okay. And a stamp had to be licked or taken to the post office and get the post office to do that and then mailed out. And so basically, communication turnaround time when I was secretary, which probably was 1976, SON communications turnaround was probably 30 days
Hmm.
before we could have a conversation like you and I are having today.
Yeah. Yeah, that's
And
definitely something that's
communication,
changed.
uh, electronic communications and technology. Now, I told you of a word that earlier that when we were talking about what was it? I'm losing my train of thought at the moment. Oh, free living. Okay. I also don't like the word technology the way it's being used. The word technology is being used solely as electronic technology, and
Mm.
technology is applied knowledge. And I think as we go into the future, we need to do SON and everybody sort of a better job of educating people of the difference between science and technology. Now, you may not
Mm.
agree with it, but George Bird described or basically defined science as a body of knowledge and the requisite methodology that was used to obtain that knowledge. Now, all knowledge doesn't come through science. I mean, you can get a little knowledge by kicking tires and a few things like that, and making observations. But basically, the technology is what basically we live by. Okay, and that's the applied knowledge we use for our basically quality of life.
Interesting.
Where we are at the moment, that brings up one other comment. Uh, when we went back to the Lisa and the Sarah programs in the Farm Bill, that basically was the first time quality of life uh, is um, is mentioned in the world literature, and quality of life is something that is extremely important today and extremely important for nematologists to understand as we go on into the future because in our today's world of 8.5 billion plus maybe people, quality of life is extremely important. And it's very important to remember also that human population didn't reach the 1 billion people mark until about 1850, even though the potential was there for that. And the basic reason, one of the basic reasons was war, and famine and disease, okay? um, plagues,
Yeah.
famines.
So
And
this kind of gets to the I think it's this question I had about the challenges ahead for SON. So, well, how does lessons from SON's history prepare for, what can what can, young leaders in nematology take from SON history to face the challenges ahead?
all of the areas that we talked about today, there's more to do. There's a challenge of all of the subdisciplines of nematology. But nematology, I think, and the other disease-oriented disciplines has a unique challenge for the future that we're just being able to realize what that is today. Uh, how the universities, I think, can, I'll pose it as a question. Can the Society of Nematology have a major role to play in integrating the activities of academia, government, and business for the future quality of life, human life, for global society? I think the answer to that is yes, but I think it will be quite a challenge. And I do not think that can happen with the Society of Nematologists working on its own. I think the scientific community, through academia, government, and private business, needs to come together for that to happen. And something like that, I think, can really result in increased understanding of how the world is known to work by the general population. And this gives me a chance now to go back to 1979. And I was president in 1978. But in 1978, we formed a new organization, and it no longer exists. And I think that was very, very unfortunate. And it was the Integrated Plant Protection Coalition. And we had a coalition between the Society of Nematologists, the American Phytopathological Society, and the Weed Science Society of America. And that organization existed for about 10 years. And our mission basically was to enhance the knowledge basis of plant protection. And that particular coalition then had what I'm going to say 5,000 members. Okay. And we were able to make some progress. And basically, some of that is the reason the Lisa and Sarah program came into being, because we could uh, travel to DC and get some of that legislation written.
Mm.
But the world works from an ecological standpoint, and nematodes are very important for that. And probably the most important part, in my opinion, are the bacterial feeding nematodes, because that's where the nutrient mineralization begins. And without that nutrient mineralization, of which nematodes are a part of with fungi and bacteria, we probably wouldn't have very many primary producers. And that also involves nematologists from a management standpoint.
Hmm.
So I think the future is even going to be more challenging from the past. But the way we've got to do it is we have to, I think, form some new alliances for major cooperation because the task is just so big.
Very interesting. Yeah, sounds like a good plan. Okay, just maybe to finish us off, if there's any other maybe personal stories or anecdotes that you remember that showcase the vibrancy of SON.
Just for a moment. Um, I think the diverse group of people in SON has been very important, and the diverse uh, organizations that they work for.
Mm-hmm.
I think SON has done a good job adapting to changes, as we've talked about from a science standpoint. I think it's the common thread that we all work with nematodes, okay, that has gone throughout nematology.
Mm-hmm.
I think we've stayed true to our mission, which basically is to foster the science of nematology, but I think we can do a better job, of that uh, in the future. I think many of the things we talked about today come down to money. And this gets into both science and economics, and I'll probably step beyond the bounds that I should be talking about today. But our current economic uh, system is based on growth and maximization. And when you have growth, you have to have matter and energy that comes from someplace. And that takes something away from somebody else, maybe nematodes. I don't know. Maybe the society. I don't know. And when you maximize something, something else gets hurt because of that process. So as I sit here winding up this interview with you, Ben, today, I think probably the most important thing that I, George Bird, as a nematologist, believes in today is I believe that there's a major difference between growth and development. And I base my concept of development on the definition given in about page 5 of the book by Meadows, and Randers called uh, entitled Beyond the Limits. And Meadows and Randers define the word development as bringing something to a fuller or better state. And to bring something, anything, to a fuller or better state requires moral and ethical value judgments. And sometimes as scientists, we think that the area of moral and ethical value judgments may be outside of our domain. In 2025, this old guy here, George Bird, believes that it is not. There's a major difference between growth and development. And if we can ever get that, okay, understood, I think we can be well on our way to a great next century for you and your successors. How's
Sounds
that going
yeah.
off? With
Well, thank you for sharing that. That's really interesting perspective, a perspective with all the history of SON and your history as a nematologist, and I
I wound
appreciate you
up,
sharing.
I wound up not only teaching nematology for many years, but remember, we began this by me asking you an IPM where the leadership for IPM came from at MSU, and it was basically Department of Electrical Engineering and System Science. And that got very controversial. And so system science got kicked out of MSU because they thought that agriculture and biology was inappropriate for electrical engineers, okay, which were basically the key people for modeling, like Howard Ferris, okay, at that particular time. So at that time, we wound, oh, this is, you got to hear this story, we forgot it. We had 3 classes in system science at MSU at that time. We had biology for engineers, we had system science for biologists, and then a modeling class, okay, after that. And if you wanted to go on, the two systems classes were 400 level, and the modeling class was an 800 level class. And I came to Michigan State in 1973, and I had just given up tenure for the second time in my life. And I had a new young family, so I thought I better go to seminars. And I knew absolutely nothing that was going on. It was all algorithms and modeling. So what I did was I enrolled to audit and take the system science core class for biologists. Okay. Well, when those three classes got abolished, I wound up teaching at MSU biology for engineers for a quarter of a century or more. And then eventually I took that class. Somebody else took it over, and I taught an honors college part. I limited, oh, and what was so unique about the story that I just told you is that Ivan J. Thomason, a very famous nematologist from University of California, Riverside, Anne McGoodwin, who just retired as a distinguished faculty member, nematologist from University of California, from the University of Wisconsin, Madison, who was one of my graduate students, and Ed Caswell, University of California, retired, who also became a dean at University of California, Davis. The four of us, no, I enrolled in that class early. They all enrolled in system science for biologists, and that's where they got their modeling experience, which continued. And then Ivan J. Thomason, okay, who was also a major player in the Society of Nematologists, when he was here at MSU on his sabbatical leave on the blackboard in my office, they diagrammed the California statewide IPM program, which is still in existence in California today. And when that happened in my office at the University, at Michigan State University Riverside, it was Ivan and Anne McGoodwin, Ed Castle, a bunch of other people there. And I was on sabbatical leave out in California, Riverside, at that particular time. And the dermatologist that just recently retired from University of Florida, and I didn't do justice today with Florida, but that's okay. Uh, Dr. Joe Noling, and Dr. Joe Noling will be coming here to Michigan State University on April 26th to receive our Distinguished Alumnus Award this year. So we'll have a
Wow.
couple of days with Joe.
Yeah. Yeah, that's an interesting addition. Thanks for sharing that. Uh,
Keep me going as long as you want to, but yeah, uh,
well, there's certainly, yeah, a wealth of knowledge here, and it's really enlightening to hear
I,
your stories and experiences with SON.
I'm sure we'll interact again. I'm
Yeah.
around.
Yep, I'm planning to go to the SON meeting this year, and I'll also follow up with notes
Whatever
from this meeting. Yeah.
you can get out of this, and if you don't get much, I'm sure you get more from other people.
Yeah, no, there's a lot here for sure. I really thank you for taking the time and
Great to
talking
uh,
with me.